and welcome to the 12th Vachaspati Radhanath Phukan Memorial Biennial Lecture organized by Vivekananda Kendra Institute of Culture, Guwahati. Today's lecture will be presented by Honorable Shri Bibek Debroy, Chairman of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, Government of India, who will be deliberating on the topic, the notion of governance in our Itihasa Purana Tradition. We shall begin our program with the rendering of Shantipath by our Kendra Jivanrati Karyakarta, Kumari Sayanti.
नमस्कार. तीन ओंकार. ओम सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै. ओम शांति शांति शांतिः.
Vedanta Vachaspati, Dr. Radhanath Phukan, was a great luminary of Assam with scholarship in science, philosophy, and literature. The first Assamese to become a master's degree holder in 1897, he was awarded the bachelor's degree in law in 1898. The same year, he started his professional career by joining the bar of Jorhat District Court. In 1903, he joined the Provincial Administrative Service as an extra assistant commissioner. After an eventful career of 28 years, he retired in 1931. Subsequently, he started taking interest in Indian scriptures, and his turning point of life came up when he began reading the Bhagavad Gita. His first Assamese publication was on Sankhya Darshan in 1949, followed by Vedanta Darshan in 1951, Srimad Bhagavad Gita in 1952, the Upanishad in 1954, and other thought-provoking compositions based on science and tradition. He also wrote a series of 31 articles on philosophy in general in an Assamese magazine, which brought him great fame. He was a vocal exponent of Vaishnava doctrines of Maha Puranas Srimanta Shankardev, the great sage of Assam, and was also awarded many academic institution titles such as Rajarshi, Tattvadarshi, and Vedanta Vachaspati. In recognition of his lifelong contribution towards literature and philosophy, Guwahati University conferred on him the honorary D.Litt degree in 1964, the same year in which he breathed his last at the age of 89. In recognition of the contribution of this great son of Mother Bharat, Vivekananda Kendra Institute of Culture, Guwahati, has been organizing biennial memorial lectures since 1997, wherein eminent personalities like Dr. Karan Singh, Param Pujya Swami Mitranandaji, Sri Michel Danino, Professor Mrinal Miri, Professor Radhakrishnan Pillai, Professor Jitendra Goswami, and Professor M. Jagdish Kumar have delivered lectures. May I now request Professor P.C. Bhattacharjee, Director of Vivekananda Kendra Institute of Culture, Guwahati, to deliver the welcome address.
Respected Sri Bibek Debroy, our honored speaker today, esteemed dignitaries and dear participants, a warm welcome to the 12th Vachaspati Radhanath Phukan Memorial Biennial Lecture organized by the Vivekananda Kendra Institute of Culture, Guwahati. Since its very inception in the year 1993, Vivekananda Kendra Institute of Culture has been relentlessly pursuing the objects of unearthing the fundamental unity which binds the northeastern part of Bharat within the region and rest of it. The specific aim of Vivekananda Kendra Institute of Culture is to focus on the Northeast, study, conduct research, and propagate its rich culture and identify the unifying elements that binds us. Rediscovering the ancient cultural unity, strengthening it, and expressing it in a modern idiom have been the crying need of the hour for the sake of the present and future generations. This is the work that BKIC seeks to fulfill. Sanskriti Oikeyam Bharata Unity, the motto, sums up precisely the vision and mission of BKIC. This institute has been conducting seminars, research, documentation, lectures come discussion by directly involving the communities concerned to understand the richness of the traditional systems, rites and rituals, identify the unifying elements, reflect on how best to provide meaningful continuity of these practices, and inspire youth leadership with the idea of development through culture. The BKIC provides intellectual insights to help emerging a nation-oriented intelligentsia to lead the society. Seminars and symposiums organized in all the different states of Northeastern India has helped to evolve local intellectual leadership, create awareness among the communities to keep their identity and culture. Sanskriti Oneshak, the Research Scholars Forum, also conduct lectures, talks, and discussions on various themes. Publication based on the seminars, memorial lectures, projects, and documentation, and video films are an important activity of the institute. The institute celebrates the Foundation Day on 31st of January every year, in which the BKIC Shanman is awarded to an eminent person who has contributed in the field of tradition and culture. Thus, BKIC is emerging as the intellectual fountainhead of the Northeast India through its perpetual, social, purposeful, social, and academic research. Once again, I heartily welcome all of you to this function.
Thank you, sir. This morning we have amongst us Adarniya Shri Bibek Debroy, noted economist and author, as our esteemed speaker. Presently, he is Chairman, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, and he's also the President of the Indian Statistical Institute. Shri Debroy was educated in Ramakrishna Mission School, Narendrapur, Presidency College, Kolkata, Delhi School of Economics, and Trinity College, Cambridge. He has worked in universities, research institutes, industry, and the government. Some of these institutions being Presidency College, Kolkata, Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Pune, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, Delhi, among others. He has, to his credit, several published books, papers, and articles, and has also been a consulting, contributing editor with a number of newspapers. He has translated the unabridged version of the Mahabharata into English, becoming only the third person ever to achieve the feat. He has also translated the Bhagavad Gita, the Harivamsa, the Vedas, and the Valmiki's Ramayana, the Bhagavad Purana, and the Markandeya Purana. He was featured in the 2019 Limca Book Awards as the most prolific translator. For his many accomplishments, Shri Bibek Debroy has been honored with numerous awards, like the Lifetime Achievement Award by the US-India Business Summit, Shri Ram Sanlam Award for Financial Journalism, etc. And he's also the recipient of Padma Shri. So without taking much of your time, I take immense pleasure in requesting our honored speaker to deliver his much-awaited speech. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, and let me start by thanking the Vivekananda Institute of Culture for having invited me to deliver this talk. This talk was scheduled to be held earlier. This talk was scheduled to be held physically, not in this particular virtual mode. Unfortunately, as all of us know, there still is Govt, and therefore one has to make do with this virtual kind of talk. Thank you also for that kind introduction. There is something the introduction did not mention, which is that I was born in Shillong, which of course now is in Meghalaya, but that time it was part of undivided Assam. In the course of his work, my father traveled all over Assam, and I was very, very young. And I have fond memories of actually spending some time when I was very, very young in Jorhat. Rauria to be precise. I have not been back to Jorhat since then. This particular talk is in memory of Vedanta Vachaspati Radhanath Phukan. I mentioned Jorhat because there are 2 or 3 things that sort of connect me to one of the great people who lived towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, and that is Radhanath Phukan. One is the Jorhat connection. One is the fact that he studied in Presidency College, which is where I also studied. And of course, the third fact is that I also happen to have an honorary degree, so to speak, of Vachaspati. I must yet again thank Professor Bhattacharya for having shown me this honor of inviting me to deliver this talk. And when I thought about what I should talk on, what would befit the memory of Vachaspati Radhanath Phukan, I thought of this particular title, the notion of governance in our Itihasa Purana tradition. The notion of governance in our Itihasa Purana tradition. Before I talk about this, I should spend a little bit of time in explaining what I mean by governance, what I mean by Itihasa Purana, and the third part is what does our Itihasa Purana tradition tell us about governance. Governance is a buzzword. Everyone indiscriminately uses the word governance. And I'm not talking about the corporate governance part of it. What exactly is governance? What is governance? Is governance the same thing as government? If governance is the same thing as government, then why should we have a different word called governance? If we have a different word called governance, presumably this means that governance is somewhat different from government. Of course, government in our structure has three layers. There is the union government, there is the state government, and there are the local governments. There are several attempts to A, define governance, and B, to try and measure governance. You will find these stated in documents brought out by OECD, the World Bank, EU. If you look at all of these definitions of governance and distill it down to its core, you will find that governance is more than government. Governance is about decision-making processes in society. Governance is also about communities. Governance is also about what citizens do. All of that is governance, which is why we have a word, a term known as governance, which is slightly different from government. It transcends government. There is a reason why I harped on this. Because one of the points I want to make, and I will revisit this later, is if I were to caricature, and I repeat, this is caricature. If I want to caricature, there are two systems that exist from the lens of any economist. I said they are caricatures, they are ideal economic systems, they do not exist in practice anywhere in the world. At one polar end, at one extreme, there is the notion of capitalism, as in pure capitalism. Who takes decision in a capitalist system? In a capitalist system, decisions are taken by the market. In a pure capitalist system, economic decisions, allocative decisions, are taken by individuals and markets. As I said, this is a caricature, this is one polar extreme. As the other polar extreme, we have, again as a caricature, as an ideal, we have the centrally planned economies. In the centrally planned economies, all decisions are taken by the state. That is, all decisions are taken by the government. So these are two polar extremes. And as the economic systems, we talk about capitalism, we talk about socialism. One of the propositions, one of the thoughts I want to leave for you, and I will revisit this a little while later, is that in our tradition there is a third. And in our tradition, that third is some decisions are taken by the king, some decisions are taken by individuals, but a large number of decisions are taken by the community. In that day and age, MRP was not ensured by the government. The implementation of MRP was done by the Srenis, for want of a better English word, by the guilds. Skill formation was ensured by the Srenis. The curbing of unfair trade practices and restrictive business practices was done by Srenis. There was no need for the Competition Commission of India. Much of this was done by the Srenis. So this is the first thought I want to leave with you in our tradition. There was this third system. The king of that day is the counterpart of the government today. The king of that day had a limited set of decisions to take. A large part was left to communities. I also said that people have tried to measure governance, quantify it, use variables to quantify it, aggregate it, generate indices, and make cross-country comparisons. Cross-country comparisons for something that is as difficult as governance is always very, very difficult to do. There are value judgments subject to that. If you look at these indicators, you will find that most of these indicators are about rule of law. The primary responsibility of governments anywhere in the world is ensuring speedy dispute resolution, ensuring internal security, ensuring external security, because in the way modern governments have evolved, the state, as in the government, has a monopoly on the exercise of force. Let me now quickly mention the Itihasa Purana tradition. Itihasa is not myth. Itihasa is Itihasa. This is indeed what happened. Itihasa is history, and history has all kinds of different interpretations. History is being made today as I speak and as you listen. But I am going to use Itihasa Purana in a very, very specific sense. In a very specific sense, in the sense that it is applied to our sacred texts. Typically, the word Itihasa is applied to the Ramayana, by which I mean the Valmiki Ramayana and the Mahabharata. The reason I said Valmiki Ramayana is because there are other Ramayans also. I don't mean Ramayans and Mahabharats in non-Sanskrit languages. I'm talking about Sanskrit. Even in Sanskrit, there are other Ramayans. There's the Adhyatma Ramayana. There's the Yoga Vasishtha Ramayana. So Itihasa is used for the Valmiki Ramayana and the Mahabharata. As everyone knows, the Valmiki Ramayana was composed by Rishi Valmiki. And the Mahabharata was composed by Veda Vyasa, Vyasadeva. Veda Vyasa, of course, was a title. It was not his proper name. We are right now in the 28th cycle of the Chatur Yuga system in the present Manvantara. Chatur Yuga as in Satya Yuga or Krita Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga and Kali Yuga. We are in the 28th, 27 such cycles of 4 yugas or Mahayugas have come and gone in the present Manvantara. Manvantara is a period that is presided over by a Manu. In every Dwapar Yuga, there is a Veda Vyasa who classifies and collates the Vedas. This particular Veda Vyasa that we are talking about is a Veda Vyasa who's 20th in the list, which is why I said Veda Vyasa is really a title. His proper name was Krishna Dvaipayan. Krishna because he was dark, Dvaipayan because he was born on an island of Dvipa. After having collated and classified the Vedas, Krishna Dvaipayan Veda Vyasa composed the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata, according to belief, runs into 100,000 shlokas. 100,000 shlokas. It is sometimes difficult to grasp the size. In the introduction, a mention was made of my translation of the Mahabharata, which is based on the critical edition, and the critical edition has excised some slokas, so it has only about 80,000 shlokas. That translation of 80,000 shlokas in 10 volumes in the translation amounted to 2.25 million words. So you can imagine the size of the Mahabharata. When we encounter Krishna in the Mahabharata, Krishna is an adult. So a question is asked about his childhood. Krishna's childhood stories are also there in the Puranas, but they're also there in something that is regarded as an annexure, Khila Bhaga, to the Mahabharata, known as the Harivangsha. The Harivangsha is strictly speaking not a Purana, although sometimes people loosely use the word Purana for the Harivangsha also. So after the Mahabharata, Veda Vyasa is believed to have composed the Harivangsha. And then he composed 18 Maha Puranas. Purana simply means ancient story, ancient. And there are Puranas and Puranas, 18 of them are regarded as major Puranas or Maha Puranas. There are minor Puranas or Upa Puranas. I'm not concerned with those. I'm going to talk about the major Puranas or Maha Puranas. The lists more or less agree. In some cases, there is, in different lists, sometimes we have the Vayu Purana, sometimes we have the Bhavishya Purana. But by and large, the list is known. These 18 Maha Puranas amount to a colossal 400,000 shlokas. 4 times the size of the Mahabharata. So these Puranas together will amount to something like 14 million words. When I'm using the word Itihasa Purana, this is the corpus that I mean. The Valmiki Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the 18 Mahapuranas. What is Hinduism? How do I understand Hinduism? It's difficult to define it, even though courts, the Supreme Court has also tried to define Hinduism. I'm not interested in the definition, but take something like the sacred books of the East series, edited by Max Muller, end of the 19th century. What texts did they choose to translate? They focused on the Dharma Shastras, They focused on the Vedas, they focused on the Upanishads. And of course, literature, Kalidasa. So whenever we tend to define Hinduism in terms of specific texts, we tend to think of Vedas, Vedanta, Upanishad, Brahmanas, Aranyakas. The question to ask is, who were these Vedanta texts for? Who composed them? The Vedanta texts were for people who were interested in attaining moksha. Attaining moksha, attaining mukti, attaining nirvana. And our texts tell us, including the Bhagavad Gita, they tell us that amongst crores and crores of people, only very few will actually be able to attain moksha. The rest of us are bound in this cycle of samsara or worldly existence. In terms of the four ashramas, we have brahmacharya, garhastha, vanaprastha, and sannyasa. How many people will actually take sannyasa? How many people will even go off on vanaprastha? Brahmacharya apart, most people will be householders, grihasthas. The richness of Hinduism is that Hinduism not only has texts on Vedanta, Upanishads, it also has texts on what grihastha should do, what householders should do. And these texts are Itihasa and Purana. And that is the reason Itihasa and Purana are important. Technically, a Purana has 5 characteristics. Panchalakshana. It is supposed to describe the original creation and the eventual dissolution or destruction, sarga. Within that cycle of original creation and final dissolution, there are sub-cycles of creation and destruction, secondary ones, and those are known as pratisarga. So Purana must, 1, describe sarga, 2, it must describe pratisarga. 3, it must describe the manvantvaras. As I mentioned earlier, manvantvaras are eras presided over by a particular Manu. 4thly, a Purana must describe the origins of devas and rishis, their lineages. I'm extremely reluctant to translate the word deva as God. Deva simply means the shining one, the resplendent one. And the devas and the rishis are also subject to creation and destruction. The 5th characteristic a Purana must satisfy is that it must describe the lineages of kings, Surya Vangsha or solar dynasty, and Chandra Vangsha or lunar dynasty. And again, as everyone knows, Surya Vansha is the history of the solar dynasty in the Ramayana, and Chandra Vansha is the history of the lunar dynasty as depicted in the Mahabharata. Unfortunately, we have reduced our understanding of Itihasa and Purana to stories. Because we read them, we study them in dumbed down versions. The stories are a small part. If I ask someone what is the Mahabharata about, that person will typically tell me the Mahabharata is about a battle that was fought on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Dharmashetra, Kurukshetra, between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. That is a very, very small part of the Mahabharata. 1/3 of the Mahabharata is about geography and geology. 1/3 of the Mahabharata is about governance. If you mention governance, immediately people will say, aha, governance in that day and age must be Kautilya, Arthashastra. Just for information, Kautilya's Arthashastra had vanished. There were references to the manuscript, but it had vanished until Shama Shastri discovered it in 1905 and translated it. The Mahabharata also has many sections on governance, not only in Shanti Parva and Anushasana Parva, when Bhishma is lying down on his bed of arrows and is instructing Yudhishthira and others, other parts also. There is a point that I want to make, and I think it's an important point. There is something known as the National Manuscript Mission, Namami. Estimates are that out of the manuscripts are puthis. I'm not even talking about oral language, oral knowledge that was not in written form, that is vanishing all the time. In terms of puthis or manuscripts, 95%, these are estimates, 95% of them have not been translated still. So far as the Puranas are concerned, and I'm talking about all Puranas, some of them have never been translated in unabridged form, don't get me wrong. We have abridged tellings of stories. But as I said, they are encyclopedias of information. In addition to the Pancha Lakshanas, all the Puranas are stores of stories. When people hear that I'm translating, they ask me, why are you translating? Haven't they been translated so many times before? As was mentioned in the introduction, the Mahabharata in unabridged form, not abridged, in unabridged form has been translated only 3 times. The Valmiki Ramayana in unabridged form has been translated only about 5 times. Insofar as the Puranas are concerned, something that is popular like the Bhagavad Purana has been translated 5 times. Something like the Matsya Purana has never really been translated word for word. There is a translation, but it's not quite word for word. And yet, many of the things that we do as practicing Hindus, because we are grihasthas, whether we understand it or not, are based on what is there in the Puranas. They exist in other texts also, but the Puranas are a major source. For example, I go to a temple to worship. the construction of that temple is laid down, the way the temple should be constructed is laid down in the Matsya Purana. There is an image of a deity, of a Devata. How that image should be constructed is laid down in the Agni Purana. I do Shraddha ceremonies. The Shraddha ceremonies are described in the Garuda Purana. The word dharma should not be translated as religion because it means all kinds of different things. Iha dharyate saha dharma. Whatever holds up is dharma. So at one level, if I leave aside moksha dharma, dharma, insofar as society is concerned, is about governance. It is about what the king should do. It is what about the community should do. It is what about individuals should do. And where does this exist? It exists in the Puranas. And let me give you 2 or 3 examples why I think people should bring a multidisciplinary approach to studying the Puranas. First example from the Markandeya Purana. In the Markandeya Purana, there is reference to a demoness named Jata Harini. Jata Harini, as the name implies, is a demoness who steals newly born babies. Jata Harini. But she's a mischievous demoness. She steals that newborn baby, goes to another house where there is a newborn baby, replaces that infant with this one. Takes that one, goes to another house where there is an infant, replaces that, and generally causes confusion. But in the process, she eats up, she devours every third infant. What this immediately tells me is that the infant mortality rate then was 333 per thousand. 1/3. So it tells me about the nature of society then. The Puranas were not composed in their present form at one fixed period in time. In all probability, although this is speculation, in all probability Vedavyasa composed an original Purana Samhita which was embellished to and added to in different parts of the country at different points in time. So all the Puranas did not originate in the same part of the country, in the same part of Bharatavarsha. All of us know the story of Vishnu's first avatar, Matseyavata, where Manu goes to a river, finds a small fish, picks it up, puts it in a pot. The fish gradually becomes larger and larger and larger and larger and saves Manu and mankind from the eventual flood. Vishnu's Matseyavata. What is that fish? A, where is that river? That river, where is that river? Everyone knows about the story, very few people know about the river. The river is a river known as Kritamala, which is now a tributary of the Vaiga near Madurai in Tamil Nadu. And most people don't even know that that is Kritamala. But the question I asked is, what kind of fish is it? In the Bhagavad Purana, which clearly was composed, we never know for sure, but the Bhagavad Purana was probably composed along the southern coastal states. In the Bhagavad Purana, that fish is called a safari. Safari is a silvery white fish that you find in the sea. And there is an expression that exists in many Indian languages, safari farfarayate. But in the Brahma Purana, which clearly was composed in the area in and around Orissa, that same fish becomes a rohit fish, which everyone in Orissa, Bengal and Assam know as rohit fish, is the rahu. I gave you these two examples to illustrate why I believe a multidisciplinary lens should be used to read the Puranas, examine them, do research on them, assuming, of course, that you're looking at the unabridged texts. The Puranas are beautiful poetry. The Puranas have information about the evolution of Sanskrit as language. The Puranas have information about geology, about the drying up of the Saraswati, for example, a mightier river than Sindhu. The Puranas have information about history, Itihasa. For example, if I am going to date from the accession, the crowning of Parikshit to the crowning of Mahapadmananda, where do I get that figure? I don't get it in the Mahabharata, I get it in the Puranas. But for our purposes, the Puranas are about governance. As I said, governance has different layers. One layer of that is about what the king should do, Raja Dharma. Had this been a physical talk, I would have asked people, give me a word for king. And people would probably have said Nripa, which means king. But someone would have said Raja or Rajan. Raja or Rajan is king, of course. But Raja or Rajan is a king who delights the subjects. And according to our text, the first king, every Nripa is not a Rajan. The first king, the first Rajan was Prithu. And Prithu set out the rules for exploiting the earth, for agriculture, for constructing habitations, for everything, for civilization as we know it, which is the reason why Prithu gave name to the earth as Prithvi or Prithvi. The point to note is that in all of these descriptions of Raja Dharma, and you will find it in all kinds of places, including when Narada goes and asks Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata, when Rama asks Bharata in the Valmiki Ramayana, when Bhishma instructs in Raja Dharma Parva, which is a sub-parva of the Mahabharata, there was a template for what the king should do. And that was what I described earlier. Ensuring property rights, ensuring dispute resolution, ensuring internal security, ensuring external security. That's it. And roughly speaking, in terms of what percentage of land revenue, so to speak, was given to the state, it was 1/6 then. Let's say roughly 16%. With that 16%, the king or the government had a minimal set of duties, responsibilities. Today, the tax GDP ratio, union government plus state governments, is less than 15%, lower than what it used to be. But our demands on the part of the government are much, much more. Government should spend 4% on health. Government should spend 6% on education. 4 plus 6, 10. Government must spend 10% on infrastructure. 10 plus 10, 20. Governments must spend 3% of GDP on defense. 23% of GDP. I'm already at 23% of GDP, and the tax GDP ratio is less than 15%. The Constitution mentions rights and responsibilities of citizens. It is my belief, interpreted as governance, we have lost sight of what is our responsibility as citizens and communities. We have become pampered. And before someone says that I'm talking about something that was composed thousands of years ago, let me point out that the British documented everything in sight. So initially they authored gazetteers for the country. And then they authored district gazetteers for the parts that were directly under the British administration, not so much the princely states. Ambala district gazetteer for the year 1883. What is happening in Ambala in the year 1883? In the year 1883 in Ambala, a canal is going to cost, how much is that canal going to cost? I'm rounding off. In 1883, that canal is going to cost 45,000 rupees, in 1883 rupees. Out of that 45,000 rupees, 20,000 was paid by the government of the day. The remaining 25% was contributed by the community. We had a system of community level institutions which existed till the 19th century. It was the colonial rule and the decades following independence that made us lose sight of what is there on governance in the Itihasa Purana tradition. Not just Raja Dharma, but about what we should do. We indiscriminately use the word Ishta Purti. What is the difference between Ishta and Purti? Ishta is a sacrifice. Purti is civic works. As individuals, we were supposed to engage in civic works. It was part of our duty. Part of our duty as a householder was Pancha Mahayagya. Daily yaggas, these are not yaggas in the sense of the sacrifices. They were the devas, they were the rishis, they were the ancestors, but in addition, we were supposed to tend to the needs of guests who arrived, Nrijagga humans, and birds and animals. Atithi is not strictly speaking a guest. Tithi is a lunar day. Tithi is a guest who turns up unannounced. Tithi. Before I have my food, I must ensure that the Atithi is taken care of. I have been to parts of India, not so much metro India, other parts of India, where if it happens to be meal time, people will say, Khana kha ke jaiye, bhojan karke jaiye. That's part of our tradition. Part of our tradition is when a guest arrives, I give the guest achamaniya, water to rinse the mouth, padya, water to wash the feet, a seat, asana, and arghya, a gift. that has been overtaken by the tradition that if someone invites me for dinner, I will have to think of what gift I should take the host. Turns our tradition topsy-turvy. My plea, therefore, is that we should read this corpus of Itihasa Purana, understand that corpus of Itihasa Purana to understand dharma as in the nature of governance which holds up society, that template which involves a limited role for the government. The government does excessive things often because communities and individuals abdicate their responsibilities. I think we should reread this corpus, understand this corpus, also because they tell us about governance, about the duties of kings or governments, the duties of communities, the duties of individuals, our duties as grihasthas, because we as grihasthas sustain society. That is dharma. Yah dharete sah dharma, that is governance. And as I said, in the process, we have this third template, not capitalism, not socialism, but the Bharatiya tradition, the Bharatiya Sanskriti, the Bharatiya Sanskara, the Bharatiya way. Thank you once again for having invited me.
We thank Adarniya Shri Debroy for his brilliance in elaborating on the subject matter, his scholarship, deep knowledge of the ancient scriptures, along with his vast experience, has shown through his lecture and given you new perspective on governance and on Itihasa Purana. And your deliberation has definitely benefited and inspired all those who have attended today's program. We express our heartfelt gratitude to you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Now, among his multifarious activities, Vachaspati Radhanath Phukan had also composed songs. I would now request Sri Suneet Nath, a Kendra Karyakarta, to present a song composed by late Radhanath.
Namaskar. ঘরে সপ্রদাদি আরো কত বীরে সপ্রদাদি আরো কত বীরে অখণ্ড প্রতাপে মেদিনী কপালে অখণ্ড প্রতাপে মেদিনী কপালে অহমিয়া জাতি আসিলে প্রধান অহমিয়া জাতি আসিলে প্রধান অঙ্কর মাধব ঐক্যর গিরিতে অঙ্কর মাধব ঐক্যর গিরিতে বেদ গান গালে কবি হরস্বতী বেদ গান গালে কবি হরস্বতী সকলকে আজি পাহরিলা তুমি সকলকে আজি পাহরিলা তুমি এলা হে ভাগরে কলহ সেতন এলা হে ভাগরে কলহ সেতন ভারতর মাঝে তোমার জননী ভারতর মাঝে তোমার জননী বীর প্রসবিনী আসিলাই দিন বীর প্রসবিনী আসিলাই দিন অনুপাহরা অহমিয়া হেরা চিরকাল তুমি আসিলা স্বাধীন অনুপাহরা অহমিয়া হেরা চিরকাল তুমি আসিলা স্বাধীন চিরকাল তুমি আসিলা স্বাধীন চিরকাল তুমি আসিলা স্বাধীন
Thank you, Srinath. We have in our midst Dr. Joram Begi, Chief Information Commissioner of Arunachal Pradesh, Vivekananda Kendra, Arunachal Pradesh Prant. I request him to give his concluding remarks and offer words of appreciation on behalf of the Vivekananda Kendra Institute of Culture. Over to you, sir.
Namaskar, everybody. It's a real privilege for me to offer the word of appreciation to the most important speaker of the day, the session, and none other than Dr. Bibek Debroy, who is the chairman of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of the country. And also that I have gone through that he is a very learned person who has the Limca Book of World Record of having translated both Mahabharata and Ramayana, and also Puranas, then Bhagavad Gitas and Vedas. And as you know that to translate a particular language to another language is not only knowing the language, but also the depth of the knowledge about the content. And Dr. Debroy has that, and that has been shown in his lecture. That's a very wonderful lecture, and I'm very sure that everybody must be enlightened and enriched. And really, we are very, very grateful to him. And it's really a rare privilege for BKIC family to have his lecture. As you know, Vivekananda Institute of Culture is located in northeastern region, which is the meeting point of all the 4 races of the world. And also more than 220 linguistic and ethnic communities whose culture This is a melting point. So BKIC is always endeavoring to unearth the ancient wisdom of this region, the traditional practices and all, and how it can be utilized for the sustainable development. And the theme is said that development through culture and nature, culture, this the harmony. That is what is right. So by the lecture of Dr. Debroy, a very learned person, and we consider that is a very successfully organized, which is being done in the name of Radhanath Phukan's memorial lecture, and everybody must have been benefited by this, and therefore I'm extremely grateful to Mananiya Bibek Debroy ji for finding out the time, despite a very busy person, an eminent economist, Indologist, whatnot he has. So he is always busy, despite that he has taken up time for us to deliver this lecture. So once again, I'm grateful to him, and I offer my vote of thanks to him on behalf of the Vivekananda Institute of Culture, Guwahati. I also offer my vote of thanks to all the participants, and more so the organizers who have been making all effort to make this lecture successful one. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
So we shall to conclude today's program with Shanti Mantra by Kumari Sayanti, Shiksharthi Karyakarta of Vivekananda Kendra.
सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः